Good evening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for that preliminary welcome. My name is Adam Davis, and on behalf of Oregon Humanities, I want to welcome you to the anchor leg of our 2017-2018 Portland Think and Drink series. So thank you for being here. Before we do anything else, I hope you'll join me in saying a big warm welcome to Mary Lee, Rinku Sen, and Scot Nakagawa. So for a couple of awkward minutes, I'm going to stand up here and then get out of the way. What I want to do very quickly here is make sure that you have a sense of the shape of the evening. I want to say a couple thanks and then ask a few questions that I hope will give our three speakers a sense of the room. So the shape of the evening is, this is the welcome and introduction time. It will be over soon, and then for about an hour, Scott and Mary and Rinku will talk, and then we'll invite questions from you from this microphone over there, as well as through Twitter and text. We're trying text, and I'll mention that in a minute too. So with the help of Bridgeliner, we're trying that. And then after the formal program ends, we're going to invite you to stay. There will be food in the back, small food, but plenty of it. We hope you'll stay and talk to each other. And we hope when you do leave, however late that may be, that you keep talking and thinking about what's been going on in here. So that's the shape of the evening. Some thanks. First, I want to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Oregon Cultural Trust for supporting this event and lots of events like it around the state and, in the case of the NEH, around the country. Three corporate sponsors. I want to thank Northwest Natural, and especially Adolph Evans, Tonkin Torp, and especially Jeff Cron and Stoll Reeves, and especially Emily Carr for sponsoring this series all year. Two media partners, and I should say both new to this for us. One is Bridgeliner, as I mentioned, which is new to Portland and getting going, and I'm not going to explain it now, but keep that word lodged in your head, Bridgeliner, and check it out later. Thanks for helping get the word out. And then X-Ray FM, which will be broadcasting an edited version of this over the next few days, and we're really excited to be working with both of them. Last thanks is just to many of you who support Oregon Humanities and also many of the organizations that Mary and Rinku and Scott work with. And so just enormous thanks for both the way you work with and support organizations like ours. Last thing I want to do is ask a few questions, and then I'm going to move this mic off the stage. The questions will get increasingly confusing, even though they're short. First question, if this is your first Oregon Humanities Think and Drink, could you make a little noise? If you've been to a Think and Drink before, could you make a little noise? All right, that's pretty close. We're glad all of you are here. Second question, if, and again, please make a little noise, if over the past few weeks you found yourself having an interaction with someone where race seemed to play a part.
Okay.
Maybe make a little noise if in that interaction your action was somehow different because race was a part of it. Okay. And lastly, if you are feeling more hopeful than pessimistic about the prospect of moving towards racial justice. Okay. Have a good conversation. Thanks for being here.
Did we have our graphic? I don't believe we do. Oh, well. We'll start in another place.
Okay.
All right. We're with you, Scott.
So we were expecting to see a graphic behind us.
Transparent.
But there it is. Look, there it is. Great. So we're going to have a discussion tonight, obviously, about race. And in that discussion, we want to address some of the kind of primary political tensions of our time and how race informs those tensions and those relationships, right? So we have here a little graphic. This is a graphic I use often When I use it, it's normally drawn on a piece of butcher paper with a pen. But fortunately, Carmosino of Apano made this graphic for me. And what it describes is what those of us who have dedicated our lives to anti-fascism, people like me, called the three-way fight. The three-way fight is a fight in which, on one side, you have the left, or pro-democratic forces. On another, the right, or anti-democratic forces, both of these being grassroots forces, right? And corporations on the other side, who have their own agenda. And in the middle, there is government. So if you think of government as the operating system of society, those three sides are in a constant struggle with one another to decide who gets to program it. So that, for me and for us, is how we think of political struggle. And that's the big container for the conversation we're going to have. But we're going to talk about a lot of things because we get to have microphones and we're three Asian Americans up here who love to talk. And so we are going to talk. And we are going to say provocative things and controversial things. We might throw a bomb or two. But all in order to kind of stimulate us, right? Move us into having a conversation about a subject that is very difficult and full of landmines. So you ready for that, right? Okay. So when I have these conversations with people about race, I often begin by saying this one thing. It's the one fundamental ground rule when we talk about race. And this is particularly for white folks, right? Especially for the white folks. And that is, don't take what you hear personally, right? Racial inequity wasn't invented today. None of you here were the architects of white supremacy. We're simply its inheritors. We're here today to talk about what we can do in our lifetimes to do something different so the next generation can inherit a different kind of reality, one in which social equity is possible, right? So don't get triggered, because I know when people get triggered, it gets in the way.
Don't get triggered.
Yes, I have no triggers. I have the ones I pull, but none of them get pulled on me. So the other thing I warn people about, and help, because I think it's helpful in these situations, right, is that one of the things that gets stimulated in this is something called white fragility. A brilliant person named Dr. Robin DiAngelo came up with this concept of white fragility. What Dr. DiAngelo says is that because social circumstances insulate white people from racial stress, the smallest amount of it can cause them to react in huge and explosive ways, right? So the possibility somebody might be saying you're a racist could cause you to explode an entire meeting about how to solve racism, right? So putting that in context, I'm going to just say one thing, one among many things I could say about racial stress, right? African American women are 3 times more likely to suffer maternal mortality, specifically because of racism. That's racial stress. Having somebody think you might be a racist ain't nothing compared to that. So let's do that justice and recognize that that's the problem we need to be focused on and keep our minds trained on that. Your eyes on the prize, right?
Right on.
Okay. So given the situation we're in right now historically, given the kinds of things that we've been seeing, the election of Donald Trump, and other political crises, not just here in the United States, but around the world, we want to dig into this thing about the three-way fight, talk about what is the role of government, what is the role of the social sector, and how do we contend for power in this context, right? This incredibly complicated context. So I'm going to begin by asking our wonderful guests a question that Asian American leader, a civil rights hero, Grace Lee Boggs, would often ask while opening meetings, she would ask, what time is it on the clock of the world? And so I'm going to begin with that question and turn it to first Rinku.
Well, the thing I always remember Grace saying, no matter what time it was on the clock of the world, was, isn't this the best time to be alive? Aren't we so lucky to be alive right now, right at this moment? And, you know, she'd say it in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s, and she got to say it for a couple of decades in the 21st century before she died at exactly 100 years old. I think it's like close to midnight on the clock, and whether or not it's going to strike 12:01 depends a lot on what we do. You know, will it end in 5 minutes? the entire world, including all of us, or will we be able to carry on to fight and love and change another day, make change for another day? And so I think it's 11:55 at night, and I think there will be a 12:01, but the next 5 minutes really matters a lot.
Mary?
Well, I'm going to act as if it is 12:01, because I think a lot of our work as people of color and as activists is acting as if, because the reality of what we're living in is so deeply not what any of us need to live and grow and thrive and be the world that we want to be, and that a lot of our struggle is to have that radical imagination that says, what does it look like into the future, and can I act as if I was in the future in the midst of all of this unrelenting 11:55 reality. And the other thing I want to do, just as we start, and we had a wonderful conversation before this amongst the three of us, is I do want to just talk about, and I want to invite you all to say this as well, of how did we get here in this moment? So not only what time is it in the world, but how did the three of us in particular get to this moment at this time in this world to have this conversation together? It's so unusual for three Asian Pacific Islanders to be together in this kind of an arena, particularly here in Portland, and have the opportunity to have the discussions we are having and about to have. And so I just want to point that out to you. I got here, and I've spent a large part of my career in government because I have understood either intuitively or overtly this paradigm and how important who gets to call what is the state and the platform of government is to us as people of color in particular, but frankly for all of us. That's where I spent my career. But I come to this moment, and I'll say that I am incredibly honored to be here with Rinku and Scott. We've known each other for a long time, but it has been many years since we have been in the same place with each other. So I just want to say I'm thrilled to be here with you. And I come here through two pathways. The first of which, those of you who know me know my father was a very particular person, immigrated from China. And as I started my career in government, he said to, I was saying, I'm the man, Dad. What am I doing in government? This is wrong. And people who know me have heard this, but he basically said to me, look, the Chinese people invented bureaucracy 2,000 years ago. You should be proud to be a bureaucrat. And I am proud to be, right, I own it, and I am proud to be a bureaucrat. So I want to start with that. I'm here through a pathway that says, I work for government, I'm unapologetic about working for government, and I'm proud to be a bureaucrat, both culturally, but also for the work that we're going to talk about, and because I understand this and how important government is to our struggles collectively. Thank you. And the second thing I want to say, just for pure pleasure's sake, is that I am only here because of the women and women of color in my life who have taught me things, who have shown me things, who have picked me up when I was sobbing in the corner, who have, supported me to do that. And I know that there are many API women in this audience. I am looking at a number of them, and those that are here in spirit with us, So none of us are here by ourselves, right? The three of us are not here by ourselves. We are here for all of the people who got us here. And I just want to give a shout out to all the API sisters who are here, who talked with me about this beforehand, who said, you can do this, Mary, and who lift me up and lift the work up every day. So that's how I'm here.
So that raises a good question, though. How are you here?
Yeah.
Wait, but are you telling me you had coaches for tonight?
In fact, I've had no original ideas.
Did someone write you talking points?
Yes. No, literally, like what I know from you guys, right? And other people who are brilliant and smart. So
Well, there
yes.
are no original ideas.
Right?
So how am I here? Whenever I hear that question, I think about the 2 days, or 2 or 3 days, period, when I was 17 and in college,
Right on.
that I became a person of color. And it was really,
Yeah.
you can really pack it in. Doesn't take a lifetime. So the story is, so I'm an immigrant. My family moved to the States from India in 1972 when I was 5 and a half, and my father was an aluminum engineer, and so he kept getting jobs as middle management in aluminum factories and losing them. So we came in 72. By 1978, 6 years later, we had moved 4 times because he would get a job and be laid off, get another job, be laid off. So, so we lived in these white factory towns. That's where I grew up. White factory towns and working to middle-class suburbs that were also very white. And so I spent my entire childhood from first grade, when I learned to speak English, to sophomore year in college, when I entered these 3 days, doing everything I could to fit in. I deeply wanted to be an American. I thought that was about being like Marsha Brady. I watched ridiculous amounts of TV when I was a kid.
Right
And I still
on.
kind of do. I still watch a lot of TV. People would be shocked if they knew how much time I spend in front of the television. It's just worse now because Netflix and Amazon, like, we're so far beyond, 3 networks and PBS. So, so I'd watch like crazy amounts of TV. Nobody stopped me, I watched it while I did my homework, and we had dinner together, but that only took half an hour, and then I was in front of TV. And I wanted nothing more than to be the model of an American, which to me was Marsha Brady, or at least Jan. Doesn't have to be Marsha. I'll take Jan. But
Marsha was better.
Cindy was too little, so that wasn't going to work. So I wanted to be Marsha Brady. I wanted to be her so badly that when I got into college and my campus had a pre-orientation program for first years of color, I skipped it. I did not go.
Yeah.
And I didn't really do anything my first year, but my second year, right at the beginning of the school year, there was a racial violence incident on our campus, and it sparked this whole campaign led by the black students to get justice in that situation, but also win other things. We fought for a new Third World Center, more faculty of color, curriculum changes. And we won all of those things, but we also fought for needs-blind admissions and did not win that particular year. But I get way ahead of myself because, September 3rd or so, I'm a sophomore. I still have Marsha Brady in my head, and one night I went to my friend Val's dorm room. She's a biracial black and white woman, and she was a minority peer counselor and a women's peer counselor. She was like the most civically participating person I knew, and certainly among our group of friends. So Val was there in her room, and our other friend Yuko was there. Yuko's a Japanese national who was raised in super cool places that were not suburbs like Santa Cruz and New York City. So I'm sitting with Val and Yuko, and they said, they started talking about a rally that was gonna happen the next day over this campaign, really early days of the campaign. And they were both gonna go, and they said, Rinku, you should go. And I said something like, oh, that's not for me. Oh, I'm not really into that. Like, not into what, the right thing. So my friends did an intervention on me because I was on some deep denial drug. And they said to me, Rinku, you're not a girl anymore, you're a woman now.
Yeah.
But I did not lose my virginity right after that. That was not like prep for, the child marriage or something like that. So you're not a girl anymore, you're a woman now. And they said, and you're a person of color, you're not a minority. And I had never heard the words person of color before. I didn't know that was a thing. And in fact, in 1984, it hadn't been a thing for very long. We were still third world, mostly around then. And so they basically were like, grow up, time to grow up and live in reality and be who you actually are. So people ask me all the time, what can I do about racism? So one thing to do is when you are challenged to do something, don't run screaming out of your friend's dorm room or house because she has so threatened everything that you thought you were up until that point. So I went to the rally. And it was kind of straggly. It was early, maybe 15 people or so. It was on the main green. I went to Brown, so elite campus, New England, Ivy, all of that, green quad. And about 15 students going around in a circle with handmade signs and really boring chants, I think 30 years of hip hop has been really, really good for movement chants. Because they used to be really kind of dull. I don't know why the folk music era of the 60s didn't produce better chants, but hip hop has made them better. So anyway, what do we want? Justice. When do we want it now? It's 15 people chanting that and walking around in a circle. And it would have been easy to be unimpressed. And I don't think I thought the action was bigger than it was. I saw it for the straggly beginning of a campaign that it was. But for the first time since we had immigrated when I was 5.5, I felt like I belonged there. Those were my people. And I think that was really the moment that I understood that being an American, these were Americans being American, just as American as Marsha Brady. And that being an American isn't about actually being Marsha Brady. It's about investing in the community you're in with the people around you to make it the most inclusive and effective community it could be. I do understand that is only one version of being an American, but I was lucky to find that version. And I feel extremely lucky that my friends loved me enough, but also had enough confidence to challenge me in that way. When we talk about it now, because we're still very close, they say, Yuko says that she just can't believe how self-righteous she was. She's like, oh, that's just terrible. But then she thinks, but look what it did for Rinku, so maybe it's okay. Maybe it's not that bad. I think they were not mean about it, and they were not mean about it, but they were firm, and that's how I got here.
Right on.
Well, I had a Brady Bunch childhood too, though. I
Yeah.
loved the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
I loved Greg Brady. He was the cutest boy on TV to me.
You are.
And I wanted my family to be the Brady Bunch. I actually wished for it. I prayed for it. I thought they have a maid. They live in this rich house. Nothing ever goes wrong. The kids don't have part-time jobs. I wanted to be a Brady.
Right.
And for me, the journey was the recognition suddenly, oh, that's fake. Nobody really has that reality. To have that bubble burst while I was still living in a tiny rural community in Hawaii, where things were so different than what I saw on TV, changed the world for me, because it got me to start thinking critically. Right? If these things, among these things, some things aren't real,
But how
maybe
did you-
start looking.
How did you realize that it was fake? Like, what?
Honestly,
Yeah.
When I was-
Why lie?
16 years, well, yeah, I guess. When I was 16 years old, guided by things beyond the Bradys by this point, I decided that I would take money that I earned selling marijuana and run away from home. And I did. And I caught a plane, the first one I'd ever been on. And I went to Los Angeles and then started hitchhiking across the country and busing and doing every other thing to try to get to New York, which I thought would be Mecca, right? I thought Holly Golightly will be right around the corner and great parties. And so I got all the way there, and I ended up living in the Port Authority bus terminal, right? And being preyed upon by chicken hawks and whatnot. At which point I decided to live another childhood dream. And I thought of that little children's book, My Side of the Mountain, with little Sam Gribley, who runs away from home, from New York, and goes to Delhi, New York. And I actually went there. And I lived above a dry cleaner, and I got a job in a bar sweeping because nobody could figure out what age I was. Right? They're like, you're either 12 or 30. And so I could totally get away with it. And I also had the huge advantage of if I spoke to people, they would suddenly be like, English, bingo, you know.
Right.
They were so excited that I felt like one of them even when I wasn't. And so all of those kinds of things started to break that reality really quickly and reveal to me the complexity of the world, you know, that these kinds of tropes are the things that hold us in place. It's like the kind of, you know, like being stuck in a petri dish full of agar-agar, unable to wade through it, thinking everything's fine here, while all the bacteria is just growing and growing. You know? So that's the moment, you know. But the Brady Bunch, I'm telling you, I still remember fondly.
Who knew?
Yeah, when it's time to change,
Yeah.
you have to
Yes.
rearrange. Right?
But I feel like there was an episode where they went to Hawaii on vacation.
Yes, two.
I know.
Two.
There was blowing your mind.
Yes, count 'em, two. I watch those things over and over again. Watch Greg Brady surf without a shirt on. Yes. Whoa,
And their
look at
hair
my
was
glasses.
finally
Well,
curly, right?
Obviously, I didn't need to be wearing them, so we're fine.
Yeah. But you know, Scott, I want to say that I think the experiences that we've all just described are really common, particularly for API. So this question of how are we raised to see ourselves within an American white supremacy construct, right? And where do we as API fit in? And lots of times, I think, at least in our generation, we were raised to think of ourselves as white. Right? And to identify with white and assimilation and success as in those things as either Marsha Brady as success or, you know, those tropes that were the piece of that. And I think it's also very interesting then as we all have our political sort of awakening and understanding, what is that in relationship to anti-Black racism? Right? And how do we as API, because in many ways, I think a number of us could say they were really foundational relationships or moments of grace that were offered to us by African American activists, right? And so how did that or does that inform who we are and see ourselves as people of color? And then how we see ourselves as, you know, as we talk about now, not allies, but accomplices? In a white supremacist construct that is growing more and more overt, has always been there, but growing more and more overt in this time, and I think calling on us to be different as API in relationship to that. So I see that theme there, and I wonder what you guys would want to say about that.
Rinku, you want to dig in?
Yeah, I think I have a lot to say about this. So I'm a post-1965 immigrant from Asia, and I don't know your family's history so much, Mary, but I mean, Scott's obviously not an immigrant. And in 1965, so the U.S. had the Chinese Exclusion Act from the 1880s. The act was repealed during World War II, although the Japanese Americans were then
For some.
incarcerated.
Yeah.
But the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed at World War II, but there were still these immigration quotas in place where it was replaced by immigration quotas, basically. And after the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, which obviously was the result of Black struggle, it was not tenable for the United States to have an immigration policy that picked and chose, what kinds of immigrants it wanted. So in '65, the quotas were repealed. And that was really when Asian immigration was opened up. And in the early days, definitely for professionals, which
Yes.
my father was,
Yes.
well-educated, and middle class. So I consider my very presence here to be the outcome of Black struggle, because I wouldn't be here if the Civil Rights Act had not passed, and then consequently the immigration law hadn't changed. And I think that the bitter irony of that then is that when we arrived, we professional middle-class Asian immigrants, we were then allowed to enter some spaces that were absolutely closed to Black people. In 1972, when my family got here, there were still restrictive covenants operating on Long Island, in those post-war suburbs that were created for veterans, but not for Black veterans. They could not buy a house for nothing on Long Island. And then, because we've been picked for our professionalness and our middle classness and our high levels of education. So then to compare our performance in the country to that of Black communities, which were enslaved and then terrorized and then segregated, that is just so deeply unfair. Like at its core, it's just so wrong and so wrong. And, I wasn't raised to be white exactly. My parents, I didn't get the sense, my parents wanted me to be Indian, They did not want me to be Black.
Right.
But I don't think they really wanted me to be white either. They thought somehow we could stay separate, and kind of protected from things.
Yeah.
So
It was really the aspiration of what was held out as the middle class and the white, the white ideal that I think we were sort of pointed towards, right? And we were talking about in the back, but secretly the Chinese believe that they're better than everyone else.
Oh, no,
so
no.
that
The Japanese
was
did.
right. So we also talked about and the Japanese are better than anybody else, and the South Asian are better than anyone else. So it was this very
not the South Asians,
not-
Indians.
Oh, sorry, the
You
Indians,
gotta
yeah.
be specific about that. Sorry.
So this very difficult dichotomy, right, of aspire to the middle class, aspire to these things, but also really secretly be proud and know that your culture is like.
Yeah, but in my family, we had the independence stories too.
Yes,
We had the fight the colonizer stories, and my grandparents on my mother's side were deeply involved in the independence movement, as were my aunts. So I did have that as a racial analysis, but it was so historical and it was so not about us now in the U.S. that it didn't help me much interpret our race our racial situation and positioning until I got to college and had support for that. So I do think that Asian communities in the States, whether they're immigrant or Asian American, you know, native born, I do think we are faced with choices about whether we're going to accept the racial hierarchy as it is and just claw our way to the top of it, because we all know that's where we actually belong, or if we are going to help take apart racial hierarchy completely. I say that as though I know how to do it, but I think that is the choice facing really everybody in the country. But for us to answer it, to make that choice, given the ways in which we've been used to keep other people down, I think that gives us, you know, potential insight and power that I hope we'll use.
I was not raised to think of myself as white. I was raised to think white people were dirty.
Oh.
They didn't bathe.
Yeah.
They didn't work. They were lazy. You know, I mean, these are all observations based on the social reality of that time, right? So many of the white people we saw were tourists. They're not working. What are they doing?
They're not bathing either, because no work.
There you go.
Yes. And my parents, having grown up under a white Republican oligarchy in Hawaii, taught us to defend ourselves against the slings and arrows we would face.
Yeah.
And so we were taught we were better than everybody else. That's what we were taught. And I was model minoritied.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That was the thing. In a Japanese American identified family that's not really all Japanese American, we were Japanese. And the Japanese were better than everybody, right? So I bought into that story.
Yeah.
And it took me a really long time to really see around the edges of it and recognize that it was a trope, you know, that it was just a kind of way of describing a group of people as the perfectly exploitable workers and the explanation for a racial hierarchy. If you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make it, why can't other people do it? If they're not doing it, isn't there something wrong with them and not the system, right? So, you know, when you combine that with living in a Port Authority, you wake up, right? So, you know, I'm still waking up, but not as sleepy as back then.
Yeah.
So we don't have that much more time, and I really want to dig into this thing, right?
Yeah.
That Rinku wrote online, How to Organize Asian Americans, Notes from Two Generations.
Yes.
I found it incredibly provocative. It was super helpful to me. And I think it raises questions that are relevant to lots of different kinds of people. And so I want to kind of let you hold forth about what that is, and then we can dig in and poke holes in her arguments.
Okay, as though there was an argument. That's very kind of you. So this is what happened. 18 Million Rising, which is the digital Asian American political organization, with some other Asian organizations, they've been hosting this essay series called Right Back, Fight Back, which is cute. I love that, Right Back, Fight Back. And they solicited essays from Asian writers, Asian American writers, about Asian Americans and our relationship to white supremacy.
Yes.
So from all different angles, people wrote. And because I was an organizer for so long, and I've done a lot of journalism about organizing, they asked me to write one about contemporary Asian organizing, because there's actually not that much written about our work and our peers. And so I agreed, and then I had to write it, and I thought, I have no idea how to do this, because I wanted to write something that people would read, and I really had this sense that if I tried to explain something, that it wouldn't work. Like, it would just be like blah, 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 and it wouldn't really, nobody would absorb it. So I happened to be at Hedgebrook, which is a women's writing residency in the San Juan Islands. Well, you all know where that is, where the San Juans are. And I had done an exercise in this class I was taking there, writing something as a how-to, as a set of instructions, you know, like a recipe or something like that. So I wrote 40 years of Asian American organizing in the form of how-to, and it says things like, you know, at school, follow the black kids around, and when they tell you that something is racist, look into it, and then after you've looked into it, tell everybody else that it was indeed racist. And the next time someone black tells you something is racist, try to remove the part where you have to look into it and just believe them and back them up. You know, anyway. So it has things like that, but like no paragraphs. There are no paragraphs in that whole thing. And what struck me while I was reading it was, you know, I mean, while I was writing it, was I felt so much pride. There's a lot of really progressive, hardcore organizing led by Asian immigrants and Asian Americans all over the country.
Yes.
And there's also a lot of conservative organizing by Asian Americans. My Chinese American organizer friends regularly, in the fights that they've been part of in San Francisco, in New York, Southern California, some other places, there have been, you know, the role that Chinese developers have played, like from China. So China-based companies, developers, political organizations. There are bots. There are Chinese bots that make it look like Chinese Americans all oppose, for example, a homeless shelter, when actually nobody in the neighborhood opposes it. Just Chinese developers don't want homeless shelters near the buildings that they've just bought or the blocks they've just bought to develop. So there's conservatives trying to organize us, but actually a lot of us are progressive, and I think the conclusion I came to is that our identity is formed by what we do, not just by what is done to us, right? And if you build that out, that means America, the identity of the United States, the shape of the United States is something that comes about because of things we do, not just because of things that are done to us. So writing that piece connected me to the diversity of I mean, it's almost ridiculous to say Asian American. You're talking about hundreds of countries and regions and languages and dozens of religious traditions, and it's like we don't actually have that much in common, except we're treated somewhat similarly by the society, by American society, and we have some common interests. Like there are things we can fight for and win together that help us. But I think we're going to see a real showdown of Asian American conservatives.
Yeah.
You know, the Nikki Haley's, the Bobby Jindals, the Ajit Pals, and like people like the three of us. I think the community's big, our numbers are growing, we're fast growing. We are political powerhouses on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, because in fact we have some money. Like not every Asian American has money, but and some of our communities are very, very poor. But we also have money, and so we have money and some numbers that can add up to political power, but we have to organize our people.
So one of the provocative things that I saw in that article was your opening statement, which is one of the things to know is that Asian America is a thing.
Right.
Right? So that immediately got me to go, oops, is Asian America a thing? And if we need to think of it that way, in order to aggregate political power, how do we do that without thingifying Asian America, right? To reify, that's a 19th century word. The Latin root of that word is res, which is thing, and the FY part means to make into, right? So the idea of Asian American,
Yes.
Asian America, which is imposed upon Asian Americans, most of us don't identify as Asian American, then becomes a thing in the way that we engage it. And because of its existence within a relationship of, to other
Right.
racial categories,
Right.
it has a tendency when we do that to also solidify those other categories.
Right.
So it's a quandary, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Seems like a both and, but then some but in there. So how do we address that?
I feel a little bit like this is what happened, and I think it's eased a little bit, but with gay male culture. There was a moment in like the 2000s and the 90s where everybody wanted to have gay male culture, right? And it was about the trappings, I would say, in many ways as it was expressed, of this ideal of gay male culture. They're all fashionable and they all wear decorate and all those kinds of things that was so divorced from an analysis of oppression and liberation and organizing. And yet it was, I think, the gateway for many people to say, oh, maybe I could be okay, or maybe I do know somebody. And I feel the same way about Asians in America around this. I am on the board of APANO, which is the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. Give a little love to APANO. And we have done some work that we have been deeply questioning about on 82nd Street in the Jade District. Right? So what does this work look like that we're calling it the Jade District when it in fact is very multicultural and very, immigrant-based, and, what connotations does the Jade District come here? This is where I'm dropping some bombs. I'm looking at Joseph right now. But I think it's that same dynamic for me of, the young hip, Asian kids, the Koreans, the whatever, they're on their hand is on the pulse of culture, and they're so into the technology, and it's all K-pop, and everything's coming out of there, and it's both real, right? Because it's real Asian people living their lives with culture, but it also becomes this trapping thing, and as you say, sort of this fetishizing of what it means to be Asian, to be in culture, and to be in the rest of the world. So I don't know. It'd be very interesting to be able to talk with, a group of queer folks and say, so how did that corner turn in terms of the fetishizing of particularly gay male culture and trappings, and how did it turn, and was that somehow in a hard way connected with gay marriage, right? But if it didn't turn, what are the lessons for us to learn where the fetishizing of, sort of Asian America, and how do we turn it, right? So back to your question of it's 11:55, we're gonna get to 12:01. What does 12:01 look like with this? Is there an Asian America, and what does it look like? And then what role do we play in the three-way fight or in any of our liberation work?
I think that I have been thinking about this a lot because I've been doing racial justice work, either organizing or journalism or some combination, for more than 3 decades now. And in that time, I've seen large groups of people change their identities. So I would argue that my people did not think of them. They were Indian, but they were not of color before 9/11. Like, that was not anything they would have embraced about themselves, right? And then 9/11 happens, and now suddenly they're like the potential terrorist and being surveilled and being entrapped and can't get a visa for their family member who's been in process for years and so on. And the reason that can happen is because racial identity is fluid. And the reason racial identity can be fluid is because race is not a thing. It's not a thing. And thank you.
Yeah.
And so I think that the danger for us, the reification danger, is that in making strategic political decisions so that we can exercise power and make things better and change material realities, we can't confuse that with that there's something essential about being Asian American. I mean, that piece I wrote, it starts out saying, call yourself Asian American, and it ends with become Asian American. And the point is, the journey from calling yourself to becoming is all about action. It's not actually about like, my blood makes me now Asian American. And at the beginning of these 2,000 words, I wasn't, and now at the end I am. But it's not because there's something essential about an Asian identity. It's because we recognize that we're responding to our historical moment and the shape of the globe and the shape of the country in a really specific way right now. And I think we can't forget that. You know, many years I've been saying race isn't real, but racism is. And I'm really thinking about ways to reformulate that now, because any communicator knows you throw a but into a sentence, you've wiped out everything that you said before the but. So we can't wipe out race isn't real, because if we can't stand up for the essential humanity of every person and the diversity, the enormous diversity we have among human beings, then our cause is lost, it seems to me. And we're not going to be able to take apart the racial hierarchy again. I do not know how to do that, but I know that, you know, identity policing and you're really Asian and you're really not, and you're true Chinese and you're not Indian enough, that is not the way. And so I don't care if people identify as Indian or as Asian American. I want that home to be available to them, but what I care mostly about is that they will recognize racism in all its forms and as the created thing that it is, the unnatural thing that it is, and fight it.
So in all of that, when we say we're Asian Americans and we're organizing Asian Americans, or if you say you're African American organizing African Americans, there is the immense diversity of those communities to contend with, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so it makes me think of something that Mary, you referenced backstage that I'm very intrigued by, which is this idea of radical love.
Yeah.
Like, how do we deal with the whole complexity of what it means to be us on the way to fully embracing the complexity of what it means to be us?
Well, I have to say, I feel very ambivalent about it. I sort of, Rinku, you saying like, I don't know what the answer is to, you know, to moving forward, and I don't know what to do with my real and present rage at the treatment of people of color and people living in low income and queer people in this, like almost everybody, right? Not interpersonally, but structurally, right? Like I am in a constant state of rage around that. And knowing that I can't live and walk in the world in a constant state of rage, you know, it's not good for me personally, it's not good for my family and my relationships, but I also think it's ineffective, right? So then where do we go with that? Where do we go with that in a way that is completely disarming and confrontational and provoking and like in your face in the ways in which I think sometimes we have to be with each other? And I've really been meditating and thinking about this issue of radical love, right? So not romantic love and the butterflies and my heart, but you know, the radical love that will kick me in the ass when I need to be kicked in the ass, right? That will confront and, you know, with every fiber in our body say no, 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 and no, but still understands the humanity, as you're saying, that like we can't go off onto a little API island, right? Or could we?
Which island would it be?
Or shall we, right? Like, delicious food, things are very...
I got an island for you.
All right. Well, maybe some of us can go to the API island, some of us cannot. But, we get, and I think the danger in that is sort of this conversation we're having about the rise of the Asian right, right? Like when you go off by yourselves and are with yourselves, there's a healing process to that, and there's a strength process to that, but there's also this moment when it turns, and it turns into some very nasty, bad stuff, I think, right? So this thing of you have to have a place to be, the home that we were talking about, but when you come out of that home, what face are you bringing, right? And I mean that both physically and metaphysically, right? What face do you bring? And a lot of what I see happening right now in this racialized conversation is, righteous white people wanting to do something about racism and centering their experiences of racism right in the center of everything and taking up a lot of space with that, that doesn't feel very loving to me. It doesn't feel very loving to themselves, but it certainly doesn't feel loving to the experience of people of color living in a racist society, right? So how can that come to a more radical love? How can we confront that in a more radically loving way? It's a struggle piece. I mean, I really want to be clear that I'm not talking about something that's soft and something that's malleable and something that's, comforting and you put it on as a little blankie, right? I'm not talking about that, but I'm not sure we have good pictures or examples or words to talk about what I think could be the potential path towards a more racially just world and environment for ourselves that is based in a radical analysis of love, and then, as you were saying, Rinku, hope.
Well, when you reference that thing about home,
About what?
About home,
Yes.
it does remind me of something that Bernice Johnson Reagan once said,
Thank you.
which is that in politics, we need the home, the place where we fit, where we are whole, where we can be who we are and feel safe. But we also need to create coalitions. We need to create organizations that engage in political struggle. And those places are by no means safe.
Yes.
They are places that must deal with ambiguity and disagreement and conflict and the vast diversity of people that we need to organize in order to have an effective number of people on our side to move public policy.
Yeah.
We need those places, but we also need home. Without the coalition, home is not safe. And without home, we don't have what we need, the replenishment, the support to engage fully and strongly in struggle. And we get those two things confused a lot. And I think radical love says something to us about that and what that takes.
Yeah.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, and so I'm going to actually invite people to start to come forward to ask us questions and start to mix it up. So you get to ask any kind of question you want. There are, however, rules.
He's been waiting to tell you the rules.
Yes. One of the rules is that you're not the only one who has a question or a comment to make. And so please make time for other people to ask. So I know you have
Keep it
wonderful things
concise.
to say, but be concise, okay? So ask the question, don't make it too complicated, otherwise we might not understand it. And give time to other people. You need to line up over there with Adam Davis, who will show you to the mic, and then direct your questions to us.
Hello, I got up before I knew the rules.
Right on, sister.
But so I'll just say I'm Nafisa. I live in town. I'm an organizer. I'm queer and brown and Muslim. So that's part of all the shit I bring to the organizing work.
Thank you.
Ramadan Mubarak to any Muslims.
Yeah.
Yeah? All right.
That's zero. Okay.
Thank you.
You guys have talked a lot about the Asian American community, which I really appreciate and love hearing, and you're all brilliant, and thank you for being here. I'm curious what you have to say about two things. One, there seems to be some cohesiveness around the understanding of what Latino or Latinx identity is, or what Black identity is. But I don't know that we ever came to a consensus on what being Asian American is. Do we include our Syrian refugee brothers and sisters? Is it important for us to figure out an answer to this question? Or is it just, screw it, let's all just be POC and like build solidarity and power together in that way? My second question is much deeper, and I would just love to know what Rinku's watching on TV.
We all want to know that.
All right. Who's feeling that one? It's not me.
I can say something about it, but I have to think about the TV because I watch so much that I forget what I've been watching. So I think Persian immigrants, Persian Americans, Arab immigrants, Arab Americans are in a tricky spot because there isn't really a clear category for them yet. I mean, Persian works, but because Americans don't know what Persia is, it doesn't, they need something bigger than their actual social and cultural identity. They need something that can also be a political identity, and similarly with Arab Americans, I think. So there is a question. I mean, they can come join us. I'm a little like, whoever wants to come, like, this is controversial, but like a Rachel Dolezal sort of person, I'd take her too. She says she's Asian.
Oh,
I'm gonna be like,
that's another hour of conversation.
yes. Yes. I mean,
Right on,
Rachel
Rinku.
is complicated because a lot of things came out about her. Lying is not so good.
Yeah.
So I don't like lying, but I can imagine plenty of situations in which someone would feel very, very closely identified with a community that they were not assigned to biologically. So there is room in my heart for that. You can probably get to that room faster if you don't lie. So in terms of Persians and Arab Americans, I think there are some tricky things. They tend to be fair-skinned. Well, not all Arabs, but certainly many, and many Persians tend to be fair-skinned. So I think the white and color thing is confusing for many. I would happily absorb them into Asian America, which isn't really a thing anyway. I mean, it's whatever we say it is. So if we want to include them, like, who's to tell us no, is my feeling. But it may be that they need their own category, and they need to, there's something for them to define. And far be it for me to say what that is. And mostly among my friends who are from that part of the world, either recently or generations back, I see them struggling with it. I think they're trying to figure it out. They're talking to each other. You know, we may see some new language and new formation in the same, it just takes time for that to happen, and I don't think they've been here quite long enough. So in the next 10 years, I'd say that question's gonna get answered by them.
But what about TV?
Oh, all right, so here's the thing. I watch way too much British TV. I subscribe to, you know, on Amazon you can get channels. I subscribe to Acorn TV, which is British, to Masterpiece Theatre, which is also pretty much British. And there's a third thing, I can't remember the name of it now, but like British TV. I think it is really, truly like the colonial mindset in me. Honestly, I find it so comforting. Like the West Midlands accent just makes me feel like I know where I am. So
right. Clearly, we've got to stage an intervention and a liberation.
Yes, I watch far too much of that.
Rinku.
I tend to favor binge watch. Like Netflix has been great because I tend to favor the longer form. I read long form. I love novels, not so much short stories. So being able to watch a story over like 12 hours, even better than a movie to me. I watch Queen Sugar. Their season 3 is about to start on the Oprah Winfrey Network. Really great show. All women directors, every episode. Ava DuVernay, she deliberately hires only women directors, and she told this story recently about how a white man, told her, Ava, the fact that you only hire women directors, some people could think of that as discrimination. And she said, sue me.
Right.
Come and sue me over that. Let's have it out in court. So Queen Sugar, let's see. I've watched like every British mystery ever made. I loved Foyle's War, which is set during World War II. And a lot because the guy who plays Foyle, like some of his mannerisms remind me of my dad. So I watched that whole series. I watched Shameless on Showtime. Shameless fans. I did a review of One Day at a Time, the remake of One Day at a Time. So good. In the remake, the single mother is a Cuban American veteran and a nurse living in Los Angeles, and Rita Moreno plays her mother, plays the grandmother. Like, how can you
So
go
hot.
wrong?
So hot.
So I'm pretty sure. We're gonna get a Brady Bunch remake. It's gotta happen, right?
With Asian.
It's the age of remakes, and
Yes.
maybe we should pitch it.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
All right.
the Brady
it's
Bunch.
another hour discussion
Actually,
on what
in
the
Hawaii.
API version of Brady Bunch.
Yeah, so that's it. That's what I watch, and
Scott, I want to say one thing also in answer to the question. I think it also comes back, Rinku, to something you had said earlier around action, right? So whether you choose to identify here or you find your own identity or whatever that looks like, for me what's important about that question is what are the actions being taken as a result of whatever identity you choose, and where do you stand and where do you come up next to in an analysis and in struggle and all of those kinds of things. And I think, again, I don't know that there's a right answer to it. I think it's evolving, but it starts for me in what you were saying about action. What do you do with what you have, and who do you stand next to, and where do you stand up, right? And that's really the more important answer to me, and I can't see the person who said the question, but to that question.
Great. Okay, we have another person.
Hi there, I'm
Hi.
April. Hey.
Hi.
I really wanted to thank you all for, coming up here today and talking and sharing good, frank, and, good thought-provoking thoughts, thought-provoking thoughts, as opposed to the other kind. But what I did want to ask all the members of the board was, how has gender affected your experience of the white power structure? How much of that gender identity is played in your experience? Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. So did we hear the question? Who wants
I'm
to
going to
start?
say it again.
Well, I can dig in.
Yeah.
First of all, on a personal level, because I'm gay, obviously, love Greg Grady. Really. I have always, lived in this sort of odd liminal space around
Yes.
gender. I grew up knowing that if I came out in my little culturally conservative town, I might not just get thrown out of the house, I might get killed. And so I lived in that fear. And so that fear informs a lot of what I understand about the world, and also led me to become a social worker when I was a very young man. And I work with people who were the victims of domestic and sexual violence and child abuse. So those stories, live with me. So on a personal level, there's this, it's hugely educational, hugely informing thing. Everything I do now, for example, I organize against white supremacists. When I get scared, I remember what it was like to do that work with families in violent situations and, remind myself, keep this in context, right? You're not in that kind of danger. So, but, I will say this about gender generally as a political idea, that I think that we are at a moment where we really need to take seriously this idea that sexual violence, sexual assault, is a structural problem in our
Yes.
society.
Yes.
In other words, It is the result and effect of an anti-democratic set of relations that create a whole host of additional problems that affect us broadly regardless of our gender, and has created an opening for authoritarian movements to drive their agendas.
Yes.
So we need to take this seriously, we need to do something about it, and we need to remember that in this past election, one of the things that came up after that Access Hollywood video, you know, the grab them by that one, was a lot of talk about how that was just locker room talk. That's just the way that men are. I saw a lot of liberal commentators on TV saying, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. That's not my experience. I've been in those locker rooms. We need to finally create a situation in which that is not really the way men are. Because the fact is that to a much too great extent, it is. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll say one other thing about gender. I mean, it's challenging being a woman leader in these settings, but I think that one of the most amazing things that has happened during my life is the breakdown of the gender binary. I mean, if you can destroy the gender binary,
There's hope.
you can do anything, is my
There's
view.
hope.
Like, that is just amazing. Who would have imagined when I was in high school, 40 years ago, that there would be space to be not boy and not girl, or both boy and girl, or who knows how many different identities there might be if we're not always trying to force people into these two. So I mean, I don't know what Grace would say about what time it is. I don't know the right time metaphor for this, but I think maybe time's up on the gender binary.
Yeah, right on.
Maybe.
Right on.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
So we have one more person here with a question.
Hi, I'm Shweta, and being from India, I totally empathize with the post-colonial mindset. My GPS still gives me instructions in a British accent. So I sort of wanted to recognize the moment we are in and what's happening in Palestine, and just wanted to get a sense from the panel about sort of how you see the Asian American movement sort of connecting with sort of global social justice conversations and struggles.
Well,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead, please. So one thing to note is that Asian American as a political identity partly comes, as I understand it, from this pan-Asian feeling that is partly a result in this country of the Korean and the Vietnam Wars. So, Asian descendant people are living here. The US is at war with Asian countries. Asian people here, act in solidarity with people who are suffering from US imperialism, right? So I think that for our communities, there's a huge potential to be powerhouses on foreign policy, on global solidarity, maybe on new modes of governance that can move us beyond the nation state, which, I mean, that's only existed for a few hundred years, so, maybe there's the next version. So I think that Asian America has very strong ties to the globe.
Yes.
And that those ties are a source of strength.
Yep. Exactly what I was going to say. I think it actually in many ways makes it easier for us, quote unquote, to understand, to have empathy, and to be in relationship to it, as painful and as challenging as it is, because of our global experience.
So I see Adam standing up.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's-
we have one more person.
And I'm going to we've gotten about 30 really great questions in, either via text or Twitter. I'm just going to read one, and then we'll go back to questions in the room. But thanks to those that have been sending them in, we'll find a way to share those out with people that have attended, because the questions themselves are really great. I'm just going to ask this short one, which begins with Mary, but I think it would be good for all three of you if that works. And it is, can I send a question for Mary? How do you express radical love professionally? And I think that means in a professional context, but you can take it.
Thanks for that clarification. Right.
Other way of doing it.
Exactly. Maybe we'll have that conversation after with a little beverage. Well, I think, we could have talked for 10 hours and laid around on couches and pajamas and had ourselves a time here, and you would have all been here. It's very difficult to talk about radical love in government, right? And that really has been the primary life's work, is to see government as so primary and so important for us, not solely as a source of oppression, violence, and the cause of most of the racial inequity and injustice that we experience in our communities today, because government certainly has been that. But trying to reframe and show up with a radical, loving attitude into government that says, the Alice Walker quote, that which we love can be saved, right? So, and I think it's critically important for us as people to save government, right? And when we look at this three-way fight of who controls government, who sets the platform, who programs it, as you were saying, Scott, it has to be done by those of us who understand the absolute need to show up in this version of radical love, right? In this version of hope, in this version of belief. So, I don't believe the progressive folks who say government is the source of all evil. I don't believe the right folks that say government is the source of all evil, and I don't believe the corporations who say there's a great ability to extract value and profit by using government structures to do that, right? If we, and I put us all in this category, abandon our ownership and our position and our relationship to government, particularly here at the local level, right? Can we just acknowledge that I work for a local county government that has a majority of women of color on the Board of County Commissioners, and we can give a shout out to our recently elected last night. I don't know if Sushila is here, but, right? Like, if that group of women, majority women of color, can't figure out with all of my brilliant, wonderful, loving colleagues in our organization what this looks like and how we turn it and how we use it, then I think we are, we won't get to 1201.
For me, it's actually a matter of managing my mood. There are more abstract answers, but radical love in a professional setting, I can't be a bitch, and sometimes I really want to be.
Right.
But even I think I'm listening to your definition, and sometimes it's hard love, it's not just comfort, it's hard talk.
Right.
But even then, you can't be bitchy about it if it's loving. For me, not judging.
Yeah.
And so I've led 2 organizations. Most of my adult life I've been in leadership, and how you act as the leader is the way everybody else is going to act.
Yeah.
And if you are so burnt out that you cannot be pleasant at work, then you shouldn't have that job anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So. Mm-hmm. For me, it involves, radical love involves certainly love for myself and self-knowledge.
Right on.
But also a fair amount of emotional discipline, which doesn't mean I don't get angry or I'm not firm or, I don't lose my patience, but it does mean that I check myself a lot, and if I can't be nice, I'm gonna take a break until I can be more even keel. I still feel rage and I feel resentment. I feel things, I'm human. But in a professional setting, I have a job to do, which is about making a welcoming space and enabling my colleagues to do their jobs, to do their work. And I find that managing my mood has been a pretty key part of it all.
Cool.
So I would just add this one thing, right? That I think radical love begins with loving yourself, which is not always easy to do.
Exactly.
I have
Exactly.
struggled with loving myself my whole life long. I have learning disabilities. I'm autistic. You notice all my tics? I can't help it. Deal. I have had to love myself through a lot of different things that made me unlovable to other people, and to deal constantly with the way that people react to me, right? How that triggers a reaction in other people who misread that as you don't like me, or you're like not paying attention to me, or whatever. And so one of the things that has taught me, the process of coming to like myself, the more I like myself, the more likable I seem to become, or I hope so anyway, because I used to be kind of hard, is you just can't assume you know why people are doing what they're doing. You have to begin with the assumption that people are complex and different, and not just let the things you see trigger the tape in your head that says, I know how this sentence ends. No, you don't, because you don't know where it began, right? So if we can just
Right
hold
on.
on to that, but draw the line at what? Asshole
Yeah.
behavior.
That's fair.
Then I think we will
Seems
be
reasonable.
doing good.
Seems reasonable.
Great. Hi. Just wanted to thank you, Scott, for my introduction into who I am as an Asian American in the world of white supremacy. A lot of it came from your work, especially around anti-Blackness and kind of how Asian Americans are kind of constructed against that. And Rinku, thank you for your poem. I read that a couple of weeks ago, like a week ago, and that made me cry actually, to actually realize that there's a place for me in this struggle. It was really powerful. My question is kind of about the idea of the American dream, and I kind of have realized that the American dream is a white American dream, and it's based on stolen land, and it's based on stolen labor. And as I'm deconstructing that, I'm kind of left with, I don't want anything to do with this white American dream. And so I'm kind of left with, now what? Like, I'm just deconstructing, and there's nowhere really that feels like it's landing, that feels like purchase that I want to build upon, because it just feels like it's based on so much injustice. So just kind of like where I'm at right now, how would you respond to that?
I have a... Yeah. I really appreciate you raising that. I am spending a lot of time thinking about this in my professional context. You know, we have this very tired, as you say, narrative of what the American dream is and what does it mean to achieve and be successful. And the reality is, for all people of color, that dream was never possible for us, right? But if you were raised in this country, you understand that dream and in some ways hope and aspire to it, right? And this is a really critical challenge for government, and I think for all of us, particularly for government. If we're trying to solve for the problem of people not being able to, attain the American dream anymore, and that's the basis upon which we're doing our thinking and our questioning and our work, we're driving to something that has never been true for people of color and is not actually true for anybody else. I mean, I'm not quite sure who it was true for, but is not true at else. There is no narrative, as you say, that has emerged yet, right? And I think part of our job is to try to birth that new American narrative that speaks to who we are today and who we want to be in the future, and that is based in a radical analysis of radical love, right? Until we do that, I think we won't make the kind of changes that we want to see societally, because we don't know where we're going. We don't know where we're trying to get to, and trying to look at this, old, tired rubric of what that meant of a white picket fence and a house and all of those kinds of things continues to lead us down a path, as you so rightly say, that is false and is not attainable. And so turning against that and trying to say not what we're against here, but what is the new narrative and how will it emerge and how will I help it birth, is absolutely, I think, one of our most critical tasks to do as organizers right now in this moment.
If the American dream is that you could come to the US and you could free yourself from the hardships of your ancestors. You could make your own way, and it wouldn't matter whether your father was a king or a pauper. It would, you would make your way based on your own action and your talent and your ability. It did work. It worked for European immigrants.
Well, yes.
It worked for them. And in Black Reconstruction, W.E.B. Du Bois's masterpiece about the period after the Civil War and after emancipation, he makes that point, and he says, actually, that's a pretty great dream, and it did work for this set of people, but it cost other people enormously.
Yes.
There's a Vincent Harding essay. Vincent Harding is was a historian. He died, and he was one of the people who wrote Martin Luther King's Beyond Vietnam speech. And Vincent Harding has an essay from around 2005 called "Is America Possible?" And what he's asking is a multiracial, pluralistic, democratic America, is that possible? The founders, they were into the pluralistic part, and they were into the democratic part, but they were not into the multiracial part. And so given that history, is it still possible? And he decides in that essay that it is. I think maybe it is. A couple of things would have to happen first, like ending racial terror. But I find it helpful to think of myself as a founder of this country. Country's less than 300 years old. Egypt was 5,000 years old. And so 300 years is like nothing, And so we're still founding it, and we have opportunities.
Yeah. Scott, will you talk about we were talking about there's never been a country that has made this shift. It's sort of the challenge and the cautionary tale to this.
Well, when we were talking backstage, we addressed the bleak reality of our time, right? The 12 o'clock, 12:01-ishness of this moment. But there has never been a nation in the history of the modern world that has been able to accomplish a shift where the founding ethnic group, because the national identity and the ethnic identity get melded together in that, right? Where the founding ethnic group becomes a minority and the nation survives. So we are faced with a really grave challenge here.
Yes.
This is a tremendous challenge. But the fact that we have no templates to build the future upon easily doesn't mean we can't claim it.
Yeah.
We're just going to have to invent it, right?
That's right.
So we need to go beyond criticism and start moving toward prophecy, to imagine the kind of world that we want to live in and how that's going to work. And in doing so, though, we have to name these hard realities. We need to understand, as Rinku said, that the American dream was really subsidized by the exploitation of those excluded from American, right? It was founded in genocide and in slavery, and its legacy in structural racism. That's the reality we have, right? There were virtually no exploited white workers until the end of the Civil War. The whole idea of a white working class in America is as a distinct interest group was created in the space between the arrival of the first Asian immigrant workers and the abolition of slavery, when white people started to go to work in a different way than they had before and perceived themselves to be competitors with those who are denigrating their labor. Denigrating being a very good word for this because it means blackening, right? And so we have this horrible history that we need to address. But as I said before, we were not the architects of it.
Right.
We can claim this time and build something different, but it's going to take courage. It's going to take a sober understanding of reality, and it's going to require us to start to tell the truth to one another, right? While also holding on to what Mary said about radical love, right? Telling the truth is not poking your finger in somebody's face and telling them to fuck off.
Right.
Really?
Not every time.
Right?
Not every
Because
time.
that might feel good. Well, yeah, not everybody. That might
Maybe
feel good to
sometimes.
you. It feels
You
good
get a
to
couple
me
of passes
sometimes,
on that
right?
thing.
I know.
I mean, it feels really, really good sometimes.
Yes.
But just because it feels good doesn't mean
Make
it's
it the right thing.
constructive.
That's right. It's not effective.
Yep, it's not effective.
Yeah.
So that's the time we're at. It's time for us to do some radical rethinking.
Yes.
And to grab this moment in history and
Right.
try to figure out what the hell we're going to do and how we're going to do it together. Because
Yeah.
that's the critical question that we're being asked right now, right?
Yeah.
Can we move into the future together, or do we have to do it separately? I say we have to do it together, and that's going to require some serious rethinking.
Yeah. Right on.
So that feels like a good place to remind people that there is food in back that we want you to eat while you talk to each other about the questions that Mary and Rinku and Scott have been responding to and getting us thinking about. I want to thank again all of you for coming, for your great questions. I want to thank people that sent in questions. We are going to try to share those. We didn't have time to name many of them out loud, but we're going to try to share them with you in the next day or two. I also want to remind people that Think and Drink is one of the ways that we're trying to get people together in groups to talk across differences about the work we need to do together and the context in which the work can happen. So conversation projects, Bridging Oregon, for Oregon Humanities specifically, many different efforts to try to get us thinking with each other and reckoning with how we understand our experience to be. And so as you please don't yet leave the building unless you're in a hurry to go. We're going to end the formal program. We would love for you to talk with each other. Talk especially with people you don't know. Ask someone you don't know a question that feels a little uncomfortable, or talk about something that's a little hard to talk about. Before we go, please join me in saying a big, huge thanks to Mary, Rinku, and Scott. Thank you.